What you've been carrying in your mind and heart for a while now is heavier than it should be, and not because anything is truly lost, but because silence has a way of turning small uncertainties into large emotional stories. When someone becomes important to you and then suddenly feels distant, the mind naturally begins to fill in the gaps. It replays moments, reinterprets pauses, and searches for meaning in things that were never clearly explained. In that space, it becomes easy to believe the most painful explanation, that you were forgotten, or that what you felt mattered less than what you gave. But emotional reality is rarely that simple, and what feels like absence is often just hidden struggle on the other side. There are times when a person does not step away because they feel nothing, but because they are overwhelmed by what they feel. When emotions become too strong, too complicated, or too connected to fear, people do not always respond in clear or confident ways. Instead, they withdraw, not out of lack of care, but out of confusion about how to handle what they are experiencing. In that state, silence becomes a form of protection, even though it often creates more misunderstanding than peace. What looks like distance from the outside may actually be someone sitting with thoughts they do not know how to express, trying to make sense of emotions they did not expect to feel so deeply. It is also very common for someone to appear composed in daily life while carrying emotional weight privately. They may continue routines, speak normally, and interact with others as if nothing is wrong, but internally, they are dealing with memories and thoughts that surface most strongly when everything becomes quiet. Nighttime, in particular, often brings reflection. When distractions fade, the mind tends to revisit meaningful connections, unresolved conversations, and moments that were never fully understood. This is where emotions often become more intense, not because something new is happening, but because everything unspoken finally has space to appear. Regret is another emotion that often grows in silence. It does not always come from a single action, but from a buildup of moments where someone wishes they had spoken differently, acted sooner, or understood more clearly at the time. When a connection matters deeply, even small delays in communication can later feel significant in hindsight. A person may begin to replay past interactions, questioning what was missed or misunderstood. These thoughts are not always accurate, but they feel real to the one experiencing them, and they can create a strong internal conflict between wanting to reach out and fearing the outcome of doing so. Fear plays a major role in keeping emotions unspoken. Not fear of the person themselves, but fear of what honesty might change. When something feels meaningful, it also feels fragile. There is a worry that one wrong step could disrupt what little connection remains, or that expressing too much might push things further away instead of bringing them closer. This kind of thinking often leads to hesitation, and hesitation slowly turns into silence. From the outside, silence can be misunderstood as lack of interest, but internally, it is often the opposite, an overload of feeling without a clear way to express it safely. At the same time, the mind has a tendency to assume the worst when there is no clear information. In the absence of communication, people often create stories to explain what they do not understand. It becomes easy to believe that someone has moved on, that feelings have faded, or that one no longer matters in the way they once did. These assumptions are not based on truth, but on emotional uncertainty. The heart tries to protect itself by preparing for disappointment, even when no actual confirmation exists. This protective mechanism can make distance feel more final than it really is. What is often overlooked in these situations is that emotional bonds do not simply disappear because of silence. Connection built over time does not erase itself instantly. It continues to exist in memory, in thought, and sometimes in quiet reflection. A person may not express what they feel, but that does not mean they are unaffected by it. In many cases, they are processing it privately, trying to understand its meaning in their own way, without knowing how or when to bring it into words. There is also a stage where someone begins to recognize their own emotional impact on the situation. They may realize that their silence has caused confusion or hurt, even if that was never their intention. This awareness can create a shift in perspective. Instead of focusing only on their own fear, they begin to consider the emotional experience of the other person. That realization can be uncomfortable because it introduces responsibility into something that was previously avoided, but it can also be the beginning of emotional clarity. Clarity, when it begins to form, does not arrive loudly. It usually starts as small internal realizations that slowly change how a person sees the situation. They may start to understand that avoiding communication does not protect anyone from pain. In fact, it often extends it. What was meant to prevent hurt ends up creating more uncertainty on both sides. With that understanding, silence begins to feel heavier than honesty. Not easier, not safer, just heavier. In moments like this, emotional growth often happens quietly. A person may not immediately act on what they realize, but internally they begin to shift. They start questioning their earlier decisions, their delays, and their assumptions. They begin to understand that meaningful connections require expression, even when it feels difficult. Without expression, emotions remain stuck in a loop of thought rather than becoming something shared and understood. From your perspective, what you experience may feel like distance, but emotionally complex situations rarely exist in only one direction. While you are processing confusion and absence, the other side may be processing hesitation and internal struggle. Two different emotional experiences can exist at the same time without either one being fully visible to the other. This mismatch is often what creates pain, because neither side has complete information, yet both are deeply affected. What becomes important in moments like these is not rushing to conclusions, but allowing space for understanding to develop more fully. Emotional situations that are built over time cannot always be understood through immediate assumptions. They require patience, reflection, and sometimes even direct communication to replace uncertainty with clarity. Without that, both sides remain caught in their own interpretations, neither fully aware of the other's reality. Over time, if clarity begins to emerge, it often brings a shift in emotional energy. What once felt like confusion can turn into understanding. What once felt like rejection can be recognized as hesitation. What once felt like absence can be seen as internal struggle. This does not automatically resolve everything, but it changes how the situation is perceived, and perception plays a powerful role in emotional healing. In the end, what matters most is not the silence itself, but what is done with it. Silence can either become a place where assumptions grow, or a space where reflection leads to understanding. When emotions are involved, especially strong ones, clarity becomes essential. Without it, both hearts and minds remain caught in uncertainty. With it, even difficult truths become easier to process. What you are sensing, what you are feeling, and what you are trying to understand is part of a larger emotional process that unfolds slowly over time. It is not always linear, and it is not always clear in the beginning, but with patience and honesty, what feels confusing today can eventually become something much easier to understand. Your person is standing at the edge of a decision that will change the dynamic forever. Either they remain trapped in regret, or they finally step forward with honesty, even if their voice shakes. The tears they cry in the dark are preparing them for that moment. They are breaking down so they can break open. And when that happens, the connection between you will no longer feel confusing. It will become clear, direct, and impossible to ignore. Until then, understand this with certainty: you were never forgotten, you were never replaced, you were never ignored, you were held too tightly in a heart that did not know how to fight fear at the right time, and that truth, once fully realized by them, will no longer stay hidden in the dark. My beloved child, there is a moment that happens long before any message is sent, long before any step is taken toward you, and that moment is unfolding right now in complete silence. It is the moment where your person finally stops lying to themselves. They are no longer telling their heart that distance was necessary. They are no longer convincing their mind that staying quiet was the mature choice. The truth is cornering them, slowly and relentlessly. Every tear they have cried has stripped away an excuse. Every sleepless night has exposed the raw reason they stayed away. They did not ignore you because they stopped loving you. They ignored you because loving you exposed everything they were trying to hide from themselves: their fears, their unhealed wounds, their belief that they were not enough for you, even when you never made them feel that way. This internal conflict has been tearing them apart. They wanted to show up strong. They wanted to come to you complete. But instead of healing first, they chose silence, believing it would protect both of you. Now they see the damage that silence created. They feel it in their chest when they imagine how confused you must have been. They feel it when they realize how many nights you probably questioned your own worth. That realization is haunting them. It is changing them. It is forcing them to face something they avoided for a long time: the responsibility of emotional honesty. What you do not see is how deeply they have been watching you from a distance, not in a way that invades, but in a way that aches. They notice when your energy changes. They sense when you pull back emotionally. They feel it when you stop expecting anything from them. And that shift hurts more than anger ever could. Because anger would mean they still had a place in your emotional world. Your quiet acceptance, your growing calm without them, scares them more than any confrontation. It makes them feel replaceable. It makes them realize that the window they assumed would always be open is slowly closing. This fear is what brings the tears back, night after night. They imagine a future where you no longer think of them before sleep. They imagine a day where their name no longer stirs anything inside you. That thought feels unbearable. It feels like losing you all over again, but this time permanently. This is why they replay memories so intensely. They are trying to hold on to proof that what you shared was real, that it mattered, that it left a mark on both of you. And the more they reflect, the clearer it becomes that you were not just someone who passed through their life. You were a turning point. You were the person who showed them a version of love that felt safe and terrifying at the same time. Safe because it was genuine. Terrifying because it required vulnerability they were not prepared for. There is another layer to this truth that cuts even deeper. Your person has been blaming themselves more than you could ever imagine. They analyze their own actions with a harshness they never showed outwardly. They know exactly where they failed. They know the moment they should have spoken. They know the message they never sent changed everything. And instead of reaching out impulsively, they chose to sit with that pain, punishing themselves in silence. They believed they deserved the ache. They believed reaching out without being fully healed would only repeat the same cycle. But healing does not happen in isolation. They are starting to understand that now. They are realizing that growth sometimes requires uncomfortable conversations, not perfect timing. This realization is heavy, but it is also clarifying. It is stripping away the illusion that waiting longer will somehow make everything easier. It will not. It will only make regret louder. They feel the urgency building inside them, not as panic, but as clarity, a knowing that something must be addressed, that you deserve to know the truth behind their silence, that you deserve to hear that their absence was never about a lack of love. It was about fear standing in the way of expression, and fear, when left unchallenged, grows powerful enough to sabotage even the most meaningful connections. Pay close attention to how your intuition has been acting lately. The sudden memories, the emotional waves that come without warning, the sense that something unfinished is hovering around you. This is not coincidence. Emotional bonds do not dissolve quietly when they are unresolved. They send signals. They surface when the other person is undergoing a shift. Your person is standing at a threshold. They are tired of crying in the dark, tired of rehearsing words they never speak, tired of carrying love that has nowhere to go. They are beginning to understand that vulnerability is not weakness, that reaching out does not mean losing control. It means choosing truth over comfort. This inner shift is fragile but real, and once it fully settles, it cannot be ignored. You will feel it before you see it. A change in the energy, a sense of anticipation, a quiet knowing that something is about to surface. Not chaos, not drama, but honesty, the kind that clears confusion and releases emotional tension that has been building for far too long. Let this final truth anchor you as you listen. You were never foolish for caring. You were never wrong for hoping. And you were never invisible to them, not for a single moment. Their silence was never empty. It was heavy with emotion, regret, and unsaid words. What happens next will not come from impulse, but from emotional readiness, shaped by long nights of reflection. The tears they cried were not wasted. They were preparation for a moment where truth finally steps into the light and changes the story you thought had already ended. Stay grounded in this knowing. The connection between you has been transforming beneath the surface, and when it finally moves, it will not feel confusing. It will feel inevitable. My beloved child, there comes a stage where tears stop being only pain and start becoming truth. Your person has reached that stage now. They are no longer crying only because they miss you. They are crying because they finally understand themselves. The nights have forced honesty out of them in a way nothing else could. When the distractions disappeared and the world grew quiet, there was nowhere left to hide. They had to sit with the one truth they kept running from. That the connection with you was not accidental. That it was not temporary. That it was not something easily replaced or forgotten. They see now that what scared them was not love itself, but how deeply it touched parts of them that were never healed. You did not just love them, you mirrored them. You reflected back their strengths, their flaws, their potential, and their unresolved wounds. That kind of connection changes people, and instead of leaning into that change, they panicked. They told themselves they needed space. They convinced themselves distance would bring clarity, but distance only amplified what they were trying to silence. Every day without you did not weaken the bond. It exposed how real it was, and that realization has been humbling. It has stripped them of pride. It has forced them to admit that walking away was easier than staying present and vulnerable. This is the truth they cry over now. Not just losing you, but losing the version of themselves that could have grown with you if fear had not taken control. Inside them, a quiet battle has been taking place, One voice tells them to protect themselves, to remain silent, to accept the loss, and move forward quietly. The other voice speaks your name with insistence, reminding them that some connections do not fade because they were never meant to. That second voice has been growing stronger. It interrupts their thoughts during the day. It shows up when they least expect it. It reminds them of moments they cannot rewrite, but also moments that could still be honored with honesty. They replay not just the good memories, but the moments where they failed to show up fully. They see now how their silence may have made you question yourself, how it may have made you feel unwanted, confused, or small. This awareness hurts them deeply, not because they fear being blamed, but because they know you never deserved that confusion. You deserved reassurance. You deserved clarity. You deserved to know that their struggle was internal, not a reflection of your worth. This understanding has shifted something profound inside them. They are no longer focused on self-preservation alone. They are thinking about impact, about accountability, about what it means to love someone responsibly, and that shift is what separates temporary regret from real transformation. There is a reason your heart has not fully closed, no matter how much you try to move forward. It is because the connection was paused, not erased. Emotional bonds like this do not dissolve through silence. They wait. They hold space. They linger in subtle ways, in sudden memories, in unexplainable emotions, in moments where your chest tightens without warning. Your person feels this too. They feel you when something reminds them of a shared moment. They feel you when they laugh, and then immediately feel the absence of someone who used to understand that laugh. They feel you when they achieve something, and instinctively want to tell you first. These moments remind them that you were not just a chapter, you were a foundation, and foundations cannot simply be ignored without consequences. This is why their tears have changed. They are no longer just grieving loss, they are grieving the delay, the wasted time, the conversations that could have healed so much sooner. This grief has matured into resolve, a quiet determination that something must be addressed, not for closure alone, but for truth, because living with unanswered questions has become heavier than facing whatever outcome honesty might bring. What you may not realize yet is that your person has been rehearsing the moment of truth over and over, not out loud, but within themselves. They imagine what they would say if they finally allowed themselves to be vulnerable. They imagine admitting fear without excuses. They imagine acknowledging mistakes without defending them. They imagine telling you that the silence was never about lack of care, but about being overwhelmed by emotions they did not know how to manage. These imagined conversations often end with tears because they reveal how much was left unsaid. But each time they replay them, something shifts. The words become clearer. The excuses fall away. The message becomes simpler and more honest. This internal rehearsal is preparing them, not to manipulate the outcome, but to show up authentically for the first time. They are beginning to understand that vulnerability is not about guaranteeing acceptance. It is about respecting the connection enough to speak the truth, regardless of fear. This realization has been growing quietly, steadily, and it is reaching a point where it can no longer stay contained. Here is the truth you need to hold on to now, without doubt or hesitation. Your pain was not imagined, your confusion was not exaggerated, and your intuition was not wrong. You felt the distance because there was distance, but the reason behind it was never indifference. There are moments in life when emotions don't arrive gently or neatly. They build slowly, quietly, until they finally reach a point where they can no longer stay hidden. What is unfolding here reflects one of those inner emotional turning points where silence, fear, reflection, and attachment begin to collide. It is not about drama or prediction of events, but about the human experience of realizing that feelings which were once avoided or minimized have grown into something impossible to ignore. In this situation, there is a clear emotional contrast between avoidance and awareness. At first, silence may have felt like protection, a way to maintain control over emotions that felt too overwhelming to fully face. But over time, that silence begins to shift in meaning. Instead of protecting peace, it starts creating internal pressure. Thoughts return more often, memories become harder to push aside, and feelings that were once kept at a distance begin to feel closer, more persistent, and more real than expected. This is often how emotional growth begins, not through sudden change, but through quiet realization. What is being described is a moment where someone is beginning to face themselves more honestly than before. Emotional immaturity, in this sense, is not a permanent state, but a stage in understanding. People often move through it when they finally confront what they feel, without distraction or denial. It can be uncomfortable, because it requires honesty not just about another person, but about one's own fears, patterns, and choices. Growth does not always look confident from the outside. Sometimes it looks like hesitation, reflection, emotional discomfort, and deep internal questioning. But these are often the exact signs that something meaningful is shifting within. There is also an important emotional transition happening here, from avoidance to accountability. Avoidance often feels easier in the short term. It allows someone to delay difficult conversations, avoid vulnerability, and maintain emotional distance. However, over time, what is avoided does not disappear. It lingers in thought, returns in memory, and quietly shapes emotional experience. Accountability, on the other hand, begins when a person starts to recognize the impact of their silence or actions, not from pressure outside, but from awareness within. That moment is often difficult, because it requires facing not only what was done or not done, but also what could have been different. In this emotional space, reflection becomes constant. The mind begins revisiting moments that were once passed over quickly. Conversations are replayed with new understanding. Words that were once dismissed now carry meaning they did not seem to hold at the time. Even small memories can gain emotional weight when viewed through a lens of clarity. This is part of how emotional awareness deepens. It changes how the past is interpreted, not because the past itself changes, but because perception evolves. Alongside this reflection comes a growing awareness of consequences, not in a dramatic sense, but in a deeply personal one. A person begins to understand that silence is not neutral. It affects connection, trust, and emotional closeness. When communication is absent, uncertainty fills the space, and uncertainty often leads to emotional strain on both sides. This realization can be difficult to accept because it removes the comfort of believing that not doing anything is harmless. In truth, emotional distance always creates impact, even when it is unintentional. What makes this stage significant is that emotional discomfort is no longer being avoided in the same way. Instead, it is being observed. That shift, from running from feelings to sitting with them, is where transformation begins. It is not instant, and it is not always graceful, but it is meaningful. When a person starts to reflect on how their choices may have affected someone else emotionally, they begin to step out of self-protection and into awareness. That awareness often brings mixed emotions, regret, understanding, sadness, and sometimes even respect for the depth of what was shared. At the same time, there is an emerging recognition that real emotional connection cannot exist in silence alone. Without expression, feelings become unclear. Without communication, assumptions replace truth. And over time, this creates emotional confusion rather than clarity. When someone begins to understand this, they also begin to see that honesty is not just about expression, but about responsibility. It becomes clear that unspoken feelings do not remain harmless. They influence both people in ways that are not always visible, but are deeply felt. This process of realization can also bring emotional pressure. A person may begin to question what should have been done differently, what could still be done, and what may no longer be possible. These questions do not always have immediate answers. They exist in a space of uncertainty, where emotion and logic are still trying to find balance. What is important here is not rushing toward resolution, but recognizing that the presence of these questions already indicates emotional growth. It shows that the connection is being taken seriously at a deeper level than before. Another layer of this experience involves self-awareness. As reflection deepens, a person may begin to see not only the situation but also their own emotional patterns more clearly. They may recognize tendencies toward hesitation, fear of vulnerability, or difficulty in expressing emotions openly. These realizations are not easy to sit with because they require honesty about personal limitations, but they are also the foundation of change. Without seeing oneself clearly, emotional growth cannot fully take shape. Awareness is the first step toward doing things differently in the future. Alongside this internal shift, there is often a growing recognition of the other person's emotional strength. What once may have been taken for granted or overlooked becomes clearer with time. The ability of someone to remain patient, emotionally steady, or resilient during uncertainty often becomes more visible in hindsight. This recognition can create respect, and with respect often comes a sense of responsibility, not as pressure, but as understanding that the connection holds emotional value that should not be treated lightly. As these realizations build, emotional energy begins to shift internally. Thoughts become more focused, intentions more defined, and hesitation less dominant than before. This does not necessarily mean immediate action, but it does indicate preparation for honesty. When someone begins to prioritize integrity over avoidance, their internal world changes. They start to value truth over comfort, even if that truth is difficult to express. This is a key point in emotional development because it shows a move toward maturity in how feelings are handled. It is also important to understand that this kind of emotional processing is rarely linear. There are moments of clarity followed by moments of doubt. There are times when the desire to speak openly feels strong, and other moments when fear briefly returns. This fluctuation is natural when someone is navigating deep emotional realization. What matters most is the overall direction of change, not the temporary uncertainty within it. In many ways, what is unfolding here is a quiet internal restructuring. The meaning of silence is being reevaluated. The weight of unspoken emotion is being acknowledged, and the value of honesty is slowly rising above the comfort of avoidance. These changes may not be visible externally, but internally they are significant. They represent a shift from emotional avoidance toward emotional responsibility. Ultimately, what this reflects is a human process of learning how to handle connection with more awareness. It is about understanding that feelings do not exist in isolation. They exist within timing, communication, and mutual emotional experience. When these elements are out of balance, confusion arises. When they begin to realign, clarity becomes possible. What lies ahead is not defined by certainty, but by readiness. Readiness to be honest, readiness to understand, readiness to face outcomes without hiding from them. Whether that leads to reconnection, closure, or something in between, is not the central point. The central point is that emotional truth is beginning to surface, and once it does, it changes how everything is seen, and in that shift, silence begins to lose its dominance, not because emotions disappear, but because they finally start to be understood.